So in talking about the solar system and the composition of the solar system, we talk about the chemistry of the solar system, the periodic table of elements. Well, let's explain a little bit about what makes up an element, because hydrogen is kind of famous for being just a proton with an electron orbiting it. Carbon down here has 6 protons and 6 neutrons and 6 electrons. Likewise, nitrogen, 7 protons, 7 neutrons, 7 electrons. Oxygen, 8 protons, 8 neutrons, 8 electrons. And so these are the sort of things we kind of like are familiar with. This is normal. But there are some things that are not normal. For example, carbon is normally 6 protons, 6 neutrons, 6 electrons. It's those 6 electrons out there that make it behave with the kind of chemical behavior it has. In fact, silicon has 6 outer electrons, germanium has 6 outer electrons, so everything in this column has 6 outermost electrons, and it has kind of similar properties. Everything in this outer right here are noble gases because all their electron shells are filled. Everything in the first column here has 1 loose electron in the outermost shell, and so they all behave very similar chemically. And so it's those electrons that make it behave the way it does chemically, and the electrons for a neutral atom have to balance out the protons. One's positive, one's negative. The neutrons are necessary in the nucleus of heavy elements to keep the protons together. Remember, the protons repel each other, so something else has to be in there attracting, and that's the neutrons. But the neutrons don't affect how many electrons you have. And so you can actually have more than just the specified number of neutrons. For example, hydrogen in particular, normal hydrogen is a proton and an electron, but you could have a hydrogen nucleus that has a proton and a neutron. Still going to have 1 electron out here because there's only 1 proton. Or you could have a hydrogen nucleus that has 1 proton with 2 neutrons and still 1 electron out here. Only 1 electron out there and 1 proton in the middle is what makes it hydrogen. But if it's got a neutron in there, it's twice as heavy, so it's heavy hydrogen. If it's got 2 protons in there, it's 3 times as heavy, so it's really heavy hydrogen. Okay. The heavy hydrogen and the really heavy hydrogen, we actually give separate names to, deuterium and tritium. Now, chemically, they all act exactly the same way because they have 1 outermost electron and then 1 proton. But they are mass-wise a little bit different. That sometimes affects the chemistry. But most importantly, tritium with 2 extra neutrons is radioactive. One of those neutrons is eventually going to decay, and it's going to turn itself into a proton and an electron and a neutrino, another subatomic particle. And it's going to end up now with 2 protons. That's going to be actually a kind of a light version of helium. Now, these versions that are heavier or lighter but are chemically the same, we call isotopes. The main thing that makes the isotopes different is the number of neutrons. Now, sometimes those extra neutrons are more or less are fine, and sometimes they're not. Like I said, tritium is radioactive, deuterium is not. Carbon, normally carbon has atomic weight of 12 because it's got 6 protons and 6 neutrons. But there is what we call heavy carbon, which is carbon-13. So it's got 6 protons and 7 neutrons. Carbon-13 still has 6 electrons because it's got 6 protons, and so but it is stable. It is just like otherwise carbon, but it is another stable form of it. There's also a version of carbon that has 6 protons and 8 neutrons, so it has atomic weight 14. We call it carbon-14. Carbon-14 is radioactive. And so it will decay with a half-life of a few thousand years. In fact, what happens is that you can actually tell how long ago something died by counting how much carbon-14 is in it. Because the longer it's been dead, the less carbon-14 is in it. Tritium has a half-life of 12 years. In the environment, there's roughly a constant amount of carbon-14, so tritium varies quite a bit, particularly since the invention of the atomic bomb. In fact, carbon-14 dating is in particular how we date when things die, because, like I said, it has a half-life of several thousand years. So after about 5,730 years, half of it is gone. Another half is gone after another half-life. So after another 5,730 years, only 1/4 of the original is left. After another 5,730 years, only 1/8 of the original, because half of that 1/4 is gone. And so this gives rise to radiocarbon dating. So something, the carbon is produced by cosmic rays in the upper atmosphere. What happens is a cosmic ray hits a nitrogen atom and then converts it into a radioactive carbon. And so that ends up being the carbon-14. That's absorbed by vegetation and releases oxygen, photosynthesis. So now an animal comes along and eats the radioactive plants and becomes radioactive itself. Then it dies, and then you can figure out how long ago it died. And so radiocarbon dating works this way. Now, it's fantastic if you dig up a human artifact and you want to know how old it is, because you can do radiocarbon dating. But rocks are billions of years old, so there's not any carbon left. But rocks also have radioisotopes in them, so the radioactive isotopes. And so these isotopes also are like thorium or uranium or something like that. They decay into other things which we can find. And so we can find, how much is left of the original and compare that to how much is left of the daughter product or what it decays into. And from that, we can figure out how old the original rock is. And so radioactive dating allows us, for example, to find a meteorite and figure out exactly how old the rock is. And so this is a very important way of doing radioactive dating. Now, the other thing about these isotopes is that the early solar system acted sort of like a giant centrifuge, and it separated out proportions of isotopes into different parts of the solar system. And so what that means is that you can find a meteorite and look at the proportions of different isotopes in it, and that will tell you roughly from what part of the solar system it started. And so, again, the studying of isotopes turns out to be very important in the physics of understanding the solar system. Again, this is a graph here showing that you start with one isotope here. This is the daughter product down here, and it increases over time, and the original isotope drops over time. So by measuring the ratio between the two, we can figure out how many half-lives it's been and how many years it's been since that rock has been around. So this gives us an idea as the age of the rock. So you find a volcanic rock, you can figure out how old the volcanic rock is. You find a piece of a planet or a meteorite, and you can do this radioactive dating to figure out the age of it.